So I'm almost ready to talk about what I did in this RecyclerView Part 3, and that was to handle item selection and choice, which is one of those things that RecyclerView is missing. So what I did was I created this thing called Item Choice Manager, and this is not a complete implementation of item choice and selection. It is liberally copied from what ListView actually does internally, and you can see it actually uses a whole bunch of ListView constants. But basically it takes advantage of sparse Boolean arrays and long sparse arrays, and it to store the check states and the checked ID states. And the big code that it probably takes the most from ListView is actually how it deals with checking positions by ID. This I did not write for this. This is actually fairly complicated if you see what it's doing. It checks for nearby IDs and searches through the list to try to confirm these check positions. I think this kind of code is one of the reasons why the framework team was happy to see this functionality taken out of RecyclerView, because it is really tricky to implement. And what we do actually for this, we need to know when the view holder is bound. So what we do is we actually have this work together in conjunction with the code that is in the forecast adapter. And in fact, in a weird way, this is sort of a helper for the forecast adapter, far more than it is actually a helper for RecyclerView. It also does a couple of nice things here. It actually restores and saves instance states. This I did right, mostly because I wanted to kind of automatically do this, and we don't automatically have a way of saving these sparse arrays into bundles, but we do have a way of saving them into parcels. So I just implemented that here. Just another function that can be called so that we are saving these checked items. And then finally, get selected item position, very similar to ListView, returns the first item that is selected. So if you have multiple items selected, it'll return 1, otherwise it'll return 0. I did not implement the modal selection stuff, so there's none of this choice mode multiple or whatever. But I do support a multiple modal here, and you'll get an exception if you try to use it, but it does support both multiple and single choice, basically, adding that functionality into RecyclerView. And then, so the interesting stuff, of course, is also what happens inside of forecast adapter. And this is pretty straightforward. Whenever we bind the view holder, we also have to make sure that we call ICM on bind view holder. Same thing with on restore instance state and on save instance state. And we also added some helper functions so that other things didn't have to call all the way in and get access to the item choice managers, like get selected item position, etc., is also supported. We also added this nice select view function here. And this is used to implement a feature that I thought was really, really important. And so it's one of the other things I sort of slid into this one. We have this concept of auto-selecting a view. I kind of threw that in here because it was really unfortunate to have views showing up. So what I do is I wait to see that we have children, like we've been doing with these on pre-draw listeners. And then once I know we have children, then I go and select a view, either the position, if there already is one, or if there isn't a position, then we go and select the first one so that we have something selected, which just looks a lot nicer when you're in tablet mode. So this is just a trick or a hack or a reasonable way of doing it, depending on how you want to look at things. So we're also taking advantage of that, and that's the reason why we exposed that select view functionality. And other than that, it looks pretty nice, works pretty well. So that's a big piece of RecyclerView. Now, the reason I didn't teach this and I didn't have you guys code this up is because I expect in the next year or so, we're going to have a better solution for doing this kind of item selection within RecyclerView. RecyclerView is under heavy development, and there's all sorts of great stuff that's gone into it in the last 6 months, and I suspect more and more of these things that are missing from ListView are actually going to be in RecyclerView in one way or another. So here is my stab at doing it in a reasonable way. Perhaps the framework team will come up with something better. So that is finishing our work on RecyclerView. Again, take a look at those changes. There's some interesting code in there. The next thing we're going to get into is scrolling in parallel.